God judges the world. Now, the specific topic of justice, or mishpat in Hebrew, or din, is a very, very difficult topic. And the truth of the matter is that it is somewhat deviant or out of the way from our general course. As you remember, the essential topic in which we are discussing is the origin of the nations of the world, where the Jews come from, where the Goyim come from, what the reasons are for their differentiation or distinction, and we will try and follow that through the course of human history itself, up to the end of time itself, past the Messianic era. But in order to fully understand what the Goyim are about, and generally how Goyim came about, we notice that in history, the Goyim were a result of the application of certain specific laws or judicial principles as it applies to the human race. And without going to review, because this is not what we're supposed to be doing today, originally man was one, Adam Rishon, the first man, and because of the sins that he did, it was given to mankind or his generations to do what he failed to do, and since his children failed to do what he did, mankind was then separated into two essential components. One component retained the strength or the ability of what Adam had in terms of creating an Olam Haba. As we have said, Adam Rishon was unique in the sense that his neshama had the capacity to transform physical reality and create an Olam Haba or a future world. And this ability was retained by a certain segment of mankind who came from Avraham and were thereafter called Yisrael or the Jewish nation. The other part of mankind, although they once had the same ability that the Jews had, lost it. And God took this away forever from them and reduced them to individuals who no longer had spiritual powers to create an Olam Haba, but they were condemned, well, so to speak. Rather, they were confined to the toll or the hana or the simcha of this world of Olam Hazeh. This became their reward. We wanted to examine how this process occurred. What did the Rebbeinu Shalom actually do to the nations of the world such that at Matan Torah there emerged two different types of human species, the Jew and the Goy. How was this done? And as we have said, it affected not their bodies, because in body or physically they all remain the same, but essentially the pneumius or the inner core of what these people were consisted of, the neshamas, were altered substantially, so that if you have two people standing in front of you, a Jewish person, that is, someone whose mother was Jewish, and somebody who is not Jewish, whose mother was not Jewish, they may be identical with respect to all features. Meaning, they may be physically similar. In fact, the guy could be much stronger than a Jew. They may be intellectually similar. They may be ethically similar. But the difference between one to the other is as vast as one species as the animal species is to the plant kingdom. Meaning, the difference in the two in terms of their pneumius, or what their neshama is about, makes them literally two separate species. Now this is a very, very difficult concept for Americans to handle, because in America we have all men are created equal. I've gone over this concept. It was so at the outset, all men were created equal. And essentially what happened was that man determined by his own deeds to become unequal. And this is what the result was, and we have discussed this in a number of different shiurim in the past. We will again go into this next week, more at length. But suffice to say that mankind was subdivided into two different species. One species having its essential residence, or its essential power, connected to a spiritual, eternal world, and another species having its power connected to a transient, physical world. That's what happened. How that came about was, we discussed in the last month or so, and we will not go into now. But in order to discuss that transformation and how it takes place, we had to look into the principles of justice itself. And last week I spoke to some degree about the concept of din, or justice, how God judges the world. Now that's a very, very difficult topic, and I discussed it in a way which I thought had to be dealt with a little more comprehensively. I started the topic last week. I had some serious questions here, so I decided to go a little more into the topic to understand the ways that God judges the world, specifically why things happen to us the way they do. Meaning, why does sometimes some good happen to a person and sometimes bad happens to him? Sometimes good happens to him, he has slothful success, or spirit, he has tremendous troubles and difficulties and aggravations happen to him, and so on. And these all have to do with the principles of justice. And what I'd like to do is today go into the matter this time a little more comprehensively so that we have a better grasp of it. And then we will go back to our original topic. I'm going to try and outline the basic concepts of mishpat as it applies, and give you all the different reasons of why something happens to a person. We had started last week and a little bit the week before to go into certain aspects of justice, and I'd like to take a couple of minutes just to quickly review some items. Because I want to go into the full scale shortly. The concept of free will. We have said that man is extraordinarily unique among all things which are created in the world in a very, very critical way. Man was given the power of a God with respect to will, not with respect to existence. Man cannot create or decreate or annihilate actual existence. It is impossible. It is the law of the physical universe, the conservation laws, that means neither energy or matter can be destroyed or created. The system always remains the same. And this law applies all over, so that man or any other being has no possibility of doing something different to existence by virtue of his own effort. But what man was given was the ability of free will, meaning that man can choose, and by choosing in one of two directions, man can affect his own existence, not anything else's. Well, he can affect other existences, but only as it relates to his own existence. How is that? What the Baruch Shem said basically is that by clinging to the Baruch Shem, by clinging to God, meaning by recognizing who he is, by attempting to establish the meaning of his existence, and to establish the relationship between himself and yourself, in terms of who you are and who he is, that essentially your existence and the continuity of existence depends on him, and that the essence of your life is to develop a relationship with him, you see, and come to know him in the way that we can know him, and bring a certain kedusha or holiness into ourselves, and therefore raise the level of our souls, or a spiritual level. By doing that, the means for doing that is the mitzvah. There is another choice, another possibility, which are the ketonim, the transgressions, which in essence are not following God's will, rebelling against his will, but by rebelling against his will, essentially you are establishing a relationship between you and God in a different sense. You are saying, you may have created me, but you are not the one who tells me what to do. I don't have to listen to you. I have my own mind, my own will, you see. And it is true, I do not have your power. I am not a paranoid schizophrenic, but, and therefore I don't believe that I am God in the true sense of the word, but what I do believe, you see, is that I have a certain independence from you, and that I can make things happen if I want them to happen, regardless of what you want or feel like. That's what the other way is. And the Baruch Shem says, you choose between the two ways. You choose between my mitzvahs, doing my commandments, or not doing them, and in so doing it, you choose the relationship that you want with me. What does that mean? And the Baruch Shem says that I let you choose freely. Freely. Now you have no idea what this means, and very quickly, freely means is that there will be no pressure exerted on you from either one end or the other end of reality. At all. In the sense that the desire to do good or desire to do bad, to go against me, will be exactly equal in terms of the temptation or seductions in reality. But choice that comes from the self, from your inner core, which transcends reality, which transcends existence. When I created you and I made you into a self, I gave you the ability to draw into that which is beyond existence, into what's in my realm, which is called the realm of Ayin, or the Ein Sof, the realm of absolute nothing. Meaning, it is a realm which transcends individuation, or essence. And I allow you to go into that realm to choose what you want to do. And if you do that, you will be acting like a god with respect to your will, literally. Because there is nothing that will tell you in either way. As you do that, you have free will. So I have made you like a god with respect to will, not with respect to existence. Now what is the result of that? The result of that is mishpat. Mishpat is nothing more than the consequence of acting like a god. That's all it is. You see, as I said before, mishpat or justice has nothing to do with reward and punishment. It has to do with creation. Since you were given the power of creation, you're given the power to construct self. That power is mishpat. And you have two choices. You can either construct self, existence. If you do the mitzvahs, what happens is you literally reinforce and strengthen the sense of self that you are, which is your neshama, and you give it an eternal aspect, or you condemn it into a world of non-existence. How is that? Because we have said, if you choose against God, what does that mean? That means in essence, you are choosing for yourself. One cannot rebel against God as an act in itself. One can only simply go in one's own direction and automatically rebel against God. If you choose yourself, then you are rebelling against Him by establishing a certain kind of relationship. Since your will is absolutely free, and you decide this, if you do a chet or an avera, a transgression, since you decide it in a way which transcends existence, you decide to do that from what? From a power which is almost divine, and you use that divine power to do a chet. What does it mean to do a chet? You use a divine power. You take a power from the world of God to deny God. If you do that, and that's all a chet really is, what you then do is you establish a contradiction in your own existence. From the part where you take yesh ma'ayin, something from nothing, that part where you draw the power of the divine to destroy the divinity, that sets up a contradiction in your own existence, and what happens is you instantly annihilate, you self-destruct. That is the consequence of a chet. And that is mishpat. Mishpat says, what will occur to you is exactly what you will have created. And that's it. Justice is creation. It is strict existence. Nothing else. I have said to you before, God does not punish and God does not reward. This is a childish explanation of what the punishment really does. Punishment is not like a papa or a mama that punishes or rewards. That's not what it is. Why? Because you are not a son of God in that sense. Now the Psukim of the Torah do relate, but only from another standpoint, not from the union of Mishpat. The Torah does refer to the Jews as children of God, but not from the standpoint of Mishpat. That is from the standpoint of Rahmanas, or mercy. That is another Hanhaga. From the standpoint of Mishpat, you do not relate to God as He is not your father and He is not your parent. What is He? In a certain sense, Kaviyachol, anthropomorphically, He is your peer. Yes, in a certain sense. How? How is that? And I say this very, very carefully. Because the Baruch Hu made you and gave you the ability to create from non-existence itself with respect to your own will. He gave you the power of an Elokus, almost, but not quite. Why? Because you cannot do anything to existence. You cannot create yourself or destroy yourself. You cannot create reality or destroy it. So as far as reality is concerned, you cannot touch it. But the Baruch Hu says, I give you the power to affect yourself. Literally, as I affect existence. And that is the meaning of free will. And that is the consequence of din. So in that respect, what the Baruch Hu says to the Neshama, you are Kaviyachol, anthropomorphically like a peer. Because I have not the ability to create or destroy yourself, but with true existential power. Now you have to be very careful. Don't go away saying that I said that we are the equal of God. Please. I have never said anything that's the farthest from what I said, although sometimes there are people who walk out with a confused notion. And I want to make sure. When I say that, why do I say that? It's not to bring God down, but it's to bring you up. There's no way to bring God down. The Baruch Shalom is existence itself. He has no beginning and there's no end. We've said this many times. God transcends all existence because He is the essential process of existence itself. But maybe you think that you're a nothing, or you think that you're a nobody. You think that you're overwhelmed by reality and by life and you have no control over anything. So for your sake, I tell you that that is not true. That in certain ways I raise you up. The Torah raised you up and says that in a certain way you are like the Baruch Shalom, because you are like, you have the power of God when it comes to your own existence. But let's be very careful about that. That is the power of free will, and that is the power of your deeds, to create or destroy. Okay, now, therefore, a person has the ability to either create or destroy himself. But the Baruch Shalom intervened and said, wait, I'm giving you the power to create and destroy, but I don't want to do that. I don't want you to destroy yourself, because it is my will, you see, that you sustain your existence and go to Olam Haba. It is my will to be made it, to do the ultimate absolute good for you. So I will do a very strange thing, the Baruch Shalom says. He says that even though I have given you the power of creation, I will suspend the power of annihilation. I will allow you to create, but not really destroy. I will interfere with the laws of existence itself, so that you can create an Olam Haba, but you will not be able to destroy an Olam Haba. Although according to the Din, you should. Just like you have the koyach to create an Olam Haba, you should have the koyach to destroy Olam Haba. There's no question about it. But what the Baruch Shalom did was, He allowed you to create it, but not destroy it. But in order to do that, He had to interfere with the laws of existence itself. He had to stretch out His hand, so to speak, and block your ability to destroy, even though you have it within you to do it. And you have that capacity. So that you do not destroy. What is that called? What is that deviation from the laws of existence called? It is called yichud, or, to put another term which you're more familiar, rachamim. Now that's a word that's very strange. All the word rachamim is mercy. But what rachamim really means is the suspension of the laws of annihilation, so that you do not destroy yourself because of your chatoim. But wait, how does the Baruch Shalom do that? How does He do that? If a mitzvah or chet affects your very existence, you see, if a mitzvah, goodness, is nothing more than a state of existence, and evil is a state of existence. Remember, that's what it is. If you do a mitzvah, you create Olam Haba. But what is that really? That's nothing more than continued existence. So tov, or goodness, is a state of existence. Your existence. Evil, or annihilation, is also a state of existence. You see? So therefore, what does the Baruch Shalom do to interfere? So I will let you in on a very, very profound secret. He does the most unusual thing. What he does is, and I will not explain the parameters of this, because this is part of a very, very advanced hashkafa. He does something which is extraordinarily unique. What he does is, he creates something called evil. What am I talking about? Evil is a state of existence. That's what it is. Evil does not exist by itself. There is no force in the universe which is called evil. You see. There are forces in the universe which attempt to seduce a person to go the wrong way. That's called the Yetzer Hara. There are seductive forces which will attempt to fool a person, to deceive them, and make them fall. There are seductive forces that will attempt to what? To create the veneer of reality over that which is unreal, the veneer of existence over that which does not exist. That's what a Yetzer Hara is. But there is nothing called evil as an entity unto itself. What the Rebbeinu Shem did is to take non-existence of self and externalize it so that suddenly evil exists as an identifiable, individuated entity. It is no longer a state of existence. It's not a state of non-existence. It's not where the neshama does a chet and poof, it goes out of existence. That's what it should have been according to Din. What Yichud does is a whole different thing. Yichud robs the neshama's ability to destroy itself. So what it does, it takes the non-existential potential and isolates it from the neshama and suddenly gives it existence. So that the neshama looks at its own wound or its own disease as if it was an outside entity. Now this is an extraordinary, this is a very deep thing what you just said. I don't know if you realize that. It is the externalization of mishpat into a whole different realm. What the Rebbeinu Shem has done is externalize it. It is, the Rebbeinu Shem has said that evil, or the ultimate evil, is not the annihilation itself, but I will take it and I will let it live as an organ, as an organism, as an entity which survives on its own and thinks on its own. But that organism is your Frankenstein. In other words, so to speak, it's like suddenly, if a person, for example, takes a poison, what should that poison do? That poison should kill him. You know, that poison should produce what's called evil or ra. That's what it should do. But what is evil? What is the consequence of poison? Death. So the evil is death. But what is death? Death is nothing more than the state of the person. He killed himself. He reduced himself to a different state called death. You see? That's what the poison does. But what the Rebbeinu Shem does is interfere. And what the poison does, it doesn't kill the person at all. What happens is, it suddenly produces something in the person's body, and that thing in the person's body erupts outside of the body, and jumps out, and stares at him in the face, and says, hello, I am your consequence. I am your production. I live by myself. I am your Frankenstein. But the amazing thing is that you and he live at the same time. You see? That's the incredible thing. The implications of what I have said in terms of the meaning of Hashkafa is extremely vast. I cannot begin to tell you what the implications of this is. Because the Buddhism interfered with the laws of existence to alter it so that poisons don't kill. They simply produce Frankenstein. That's all. Now, does that mean you're free? No. You've got a Frankenstein on your back now. That's what it is. And what's the problem having Frankenstein on your back? He happens to have a stick in his hand. And as he's climbing your back, he hits you over the head and says, go this way, go that way. So you've lost your freedom, but you haven't lost your life. You see? So the job now is to get rid of the Frankenstein and live. If evil was part of your body, if the poison was allowed to work in your system, you would be dead, and it would be over. But now that evil is a monkey or Frankenstein on your back that's hitting you with a stick, the job is changed. Get rid of that Frankenstein. You see? And it's all clear. And you will live in spite of the fact that you will produce non-existence. Or you should have produced annihilation. Yes. Good question. The Nachash who's a snake that attempted to seduce Chava and Adam, was the representation of the Yetzer Hara who was outside of Adam. But that Nachash was not an evil being. That Nachash is nothing more. The Nachash in the situation of Adam and Chava is the personification of the seductive force. That's all. His job was to seduce, so that he can get you to follow that which is illusory or not real. But the Nachash himself was nothing more than the personification of that seductive force. That's all. If Adam had not listened to him, what would have happened is he would have established his own neshama, his own continued existence, and the Nachash would have been annihilated. The Nachash, the Yetzer Hara, and the entire seductive element of the Bria, of reality, would have been annihilated. You see. Instead, because he sinned, what should have happened is that the Nachash should have lived and he should have been annihilated. You see? That's what should have happened. But the Nachash should not have been affected. Essentially, what Mishpat calls for is what's called alternative annihilation. Either you destroy the Nachash, the seductive force, or it destroys you. One of the two, and the other remains, essentially. That's what would have resulted. But what the Banishim did was something different. When Adam sinned, he should have been annihilated, and the Nachash should have been around. Because there was nothing wrong with the Nachash. The Nachash didn't do anything wrong, so to speak. He simply did his job. Now you're going to jump up and tell me, but the Nachash was punished. And I will tell you the Nachash was not punished. He was altered. He was transfigured. He was transformed into a different being. That transformation of the Nachash is the externalization of evil. Now I will not go into that. That's already beyond what I want to go into.
But I'm not sure the comparison between what you did and the Nachash.
Yes. Let me simply say the following. The Nachash is a seductive force that is not inherently evil. He does what God told him to do. He is the Yetzer Hara. And the Yetzer Hara is a Malach, in this case, whose power now is through the Nachash, whose job is to go seduce man. That's what the Banishim did. When the Banishim created all the Malachim, he looked at one of them and says, "You, come here." And he says, "I want you to go down and seduce this person." He said, "That's what I want you to do that." And why do I want you to do that? Because he wants man to create himself. To remove the problem of anamnic super, as we said. He wants man to build his own Olam Haba. He wants man to act like a god and build his own Olam Haba. That's what he wants. So he gives man free will and choice. But he's got to give man choice. Choice implies two different directions. So he needs another power to confuse man and to seduce him into that which is illusory. That is the Yetzer Hara. The illusion of reality. It is a seduction. But it is not. It is not evil. This is. Yes. Now what this has to do with the Nachash and what this has to do with everything in the world was altered. You see. Everything changed as a result of what happened by the Chet. But I'm just saying what the basic idea is. Evil was no longer a state of existence. It was externalized into an entity, a Frankenstein. And because it is now a Frankenstein, it can be annihilated without touching the subject. And that is the idea. With this concept, let us look more closely into Din, or Mishpat itself. Let us go into the concept of Din or Mishpat. How does God judge men? Okay, depends on what you do. Now we have the basic principle. We see that what you do, number one, is an active creation and determines your state of existence. You see? And number two, in certain cases, God will suspend the consequence and allow you to live with the acts of evil as a Frankenstein who confronts you on a daily basis. Okay? Those are the two basic concepts. God comes to a person and looks very carefully at what he does. He looks very, very carefully at what he's doing. He assesses the full sum of all his deeds. When a person dies, when a person is not dead yet, every Rosh Hashanah, the Banishim conducts a judicial process. He really conducts it every day. But Rosh Hashanah is when he conducts the judicial process for the entire year. He also conducts it when you die. When a person dies and goes up to the Shemayim, God also judges the person. That is the second time that he is judged. Every year of his life, and finally at the end of his life. And finally there is a third time when he is judged, which is at the end of all time. After the Messianic period, right before the beginning of Olam Haba. It is called the Great Day of Judgment. The awesome feared Day of Judgment. Yom Hadin HaGadol, that's what it's referred to. The Great Day of Judgment. Where God judges all of mankind and every living thing in terms of what will be its eternal condition. When the Baruch Hashem does look at you, how does he look at you? He sees at the level of deeds that you've done. He evaluates the quantity and the quality of your deeds. Simply put, he examines to what degree you are willing to establish a relationship with him, to what degree you loved him, feared him, and attempted to know what the truth was all about. That is the essence. And he looks and he sees. There is a certain threshold called the minimum threshold of this creative process. In order to go into Olam Haba, which is a place which has all the pleasures of this world, totally abstracted from physical form, so that the Kedusha behind all satisfactions that exist now exist in its pure state in Olam Haba. In Olam Haba is a place where the perception is that of absolute beauty. It's like hearing music that produces absolute ecstasy, or tasting something which produces total simcha, you see. How is that possible? That is not possible in a physical state. It is only possible in a spiritual state, in the state of the neshama. And what the Baruch Hashem does is he allows the neshama to transform the guf, the body. And when the guf is transformed, it loses its physical substance, and the whole person becomes a spiritual being. And in that new phase, he's capable of manifesting all his chayvus, all his satisfactions, in a way that has no barriers to them, so that he can connect to the ultimate simcha and joy without any kind of barrier. But in order to enjoy that level, in order to enjoy that existence, that ultimate existence, he will have had to establish a certain level of self, a certain level of existence. If he fails to establish the minimal level of existence, he cannot survive in that state. Just like none of you would want to go to a tremendous gala or a fair or wedding with serious ulcers, bleeding ulcers. None of you will want to attend a sports event, to participate in a sports event in a state of serious cardiac arrhythmia. It is the same thing. Nobody will want to go into Olam Haba where the neshama is so deprived and exhausted that it can barely just hang on to something called existence. That's not what Olam Haba is about. And that kind of neshama cannot make it in Olam Haba. If it can just barely hang on by the last thread to something called existence, it won't make it. That is the minimal level. So, what the Baruch Hashem first judges is whether or not you survive that minimal level. If all the deeds in your life, if the amount of Kedusha, the amount of spirituality in your life is so minimal that you miss the minimal levels of existence, you don't make it. What happens to you then? Then the deeds that you have performed are allowed to act according to Mishpat, and you are annihilated. Because you will have annihilated yourself. That's all. The Baruch Hashem does not interfere. God simply says, let you become what you have created, and you are gone. Remember, it is your annihilation as a result of your deeds. You created, you disfigured yourself. You have no one to blame. And you will have put yourself into a self-destruct. The Banisham stands aside, so to speak, and allows you to work your own magic, you see, and disappear from the room. If you go beyond that threshold, you have hung on to enough existence to stay on. You have qualified to get into eternity. You feel very happy. So you should be happy. You should be ecstatic. But wait, there are many levels of eternity. You can be living in eternity in the basement too. Or you can be living in eternity in a mansion. There are many, many levels of where you're going to be for eternity. And you must remember that the address that you have chosen for eternity, based on what you've done, is your permanent address. You will never move. Now, if any of you feel bad, or you feel confined by the apartment that you're in now, and you realize the importance of getting out of a bad deal, you should be very, very frightened indeed, because in essence, in Olam Haba, you cannot get out of a bad deal. That bad deal is you, and it becomes permanent. So, if you are below the threshold, or you can be above the threshold, these are the two aspects of din. Now, let's take the unfortunate fellow who is below the threshold. Now, some of you may be thinking, wow, how far I am from this threshold? Well, what the Storm say, what Rabbi Chaim Musalu says essentially, is that most people, the majority of people are above the threshold. So I first want to give you all a quick feeling of relief. But there is a small minority, people who are very evil, who have devoted their lives to narcissism, to total selfishness, cruelty. I say cruelty to another person. And the Banisham, God hates cruelty. And when a person has devoted his life to being cruel, no matter what his motive, so that he can be better, or he can be on top of people, but the dispensation of cruelty really does very bad to him. And those kind of people, generally, are in big trouble. People also are in big trouble, for example, if they devote their entire life to speaking Lashon Hara. There are things that the Gemara, the Talmud tells us, Ein lo chelik le'olam haba. There are certain types of mitzvahs that a person will not see Olam Haba. What does not see Olam Haba mean? It means that the consequence of his deed is non-existent. The person devotes himself and indulges in a great deal of Lashon Hara so that he destroys many people's lives. You see, he is in very, very serious trouble. If a person is not from, for example, he's not religious himself, for whatever reason, he doesn't feel like practicing the Torah, and he makes it his life's work to make sure that he is not alone in this, but he makes sure that there are many other people who will not do mitzvahs, and he raises himself up to try and convince as many Jews as possible to get away from the Torah, to get away from God, to do your own thing, to be your own thing. He is in very, very serious trouble. But wait, what about a person like that? He has done certain mitzvahs, hasn't he? There is no person devoid of good deeds, no matter how evil he is. What does the Banisham do with these good deeds? And as we've said last time, the Midas HaMishpat, the din says, wait, even if this person is below the threshold, you must repay him for the good things that he's done. You see, just like we pay him for the evil with non-existence, we have to pay him with the good deeds that he's done also, no matter how cruel he was. Even Hitler, if Hitler did one mitzvah, the Midas HaDin demands that Hitler gets a reward for that mitzvah. That is the nature of din. That is true justice. And here's where we see the other side of the coin. Olam Haba is a very interesting place. It is a place of perfection. Olam Haba. Meaning that in Olam Haba, there is only two things in Olam Haba. There is either existence or there's non-existence. That's it. You can either be part of the living or part of the dead, meaning the be annihilated. You cannot have features that combine the both. You cannot have good and evil mixed into you. You can't. Because Olam Haba is a place of total purity. No mixtures. So therefore, Olam Haba is a place of unity or perfection. If you have a man who's such a rasha that he is already below the threshold, he's below the threshold of existence, then he has good deeds. That person cannot be annihilated. When it comes to time for Yom Adin, that person cannot be annihilated. Why not? Because he has certain good deeds. You see, he has good deeds connected to him. And as long as he has good deeds, he cannot be annihilated. He's a combination. So he cannot get the ultimate position, the ultimate situation that he should deserve. So what does the punishment do? That's a very big problem. Why? Because what is goodness? We have said that goodness is existence, haven't we? It is a state of existence, isn't it? So if you have a very great rasha who's done many, many sins and acted terribly to other people with great, great cruelty, that man has created his own existence in a way that should self-destruct. But he has also done good things. Let's say a couple here and there. So what that does, that should attempt to what? To reposition his existence so that to some extent he can survive. So what you find is a strange contradiction in the person's existence. You see, what do you do? What do you do in this case? Most of him is evil and therefore should be destroyed. But there's a piece of him which is good and should be retained. So what does the Banishim do? Well, the Banishim judges the fact that he's below the threshold, so he should be annihilated. But what do you do with Tov? The Midas Hadin says you must compensate for the good that he did. But the good that he did is continued existence. You've got a big problem. Do we all understand that? So here is one of the most amazing things. And I am not clear about the origin of it. But what the Banishim does do, he enters into this person's neshama, and watch this, and he externalizes the good. You see what happens? In other words, what he does is, he takes away the good that the person did as a statement of his existence, the rasha, and he externalizes it, so that suddenly the rasha looks and sees the goodness that he's done outside of him, not in him. Normally goodness, or the result of a mitzvah or a good deed, should be continued existence. Just like the result of a sin should be annihilation of existence. But in the case of a rasha, who falls below the threshold and should not survive, his good deeds prevent his non-existence. Because the good deeds insist on him continuing into existence. So how do you get rid of that? What the Banishim does is externalize the good deeds. So they are not statements of the person's existence, so that this person becomes a complete entity of what? Of a being who should self-destruct. And the good deeds that he's done now become externalized, so he looks at them in the face, and he has to be rewarded for them as an external thing. So what the Banishim then does is reward the rasha. He gives him certain good things. He gives him certain simcha. He gives him certain tovus in this world, while he's alive now. And by doing that, he removes the good entity. And that good entity, which is outside of him, disappears. Because he gets paid back. So all that's left is the self-destruct aspect of his existence. Hence he then goes up, when he dies, to Olam Haba, and is totally annihilated. What about the good that he did? Where is it? He's been paid back. He's been paid back already. Nobody can claim anything against Banishim. The Banishim gave him back the goodness that he deserved for the mitzvahs that he did. You see. But in order to do that, in order to pay him back, the Banishim had to take that mitzvah from the person's neshama and put it outside and pay him back outside. So that all that lays left in his neshama is total evil, and the person could be annihilated. A rasha who should not be getting Olam Haba at all, he's paid back his mitzvahs while he lives on this world. so that he eats them up. He eats them up, and he cannot claim in the future time that he wants to continue to exist in Olam Haba. Because the Rebbeinu says to him, you have nothing left. I have paid you back in this life. You have no claim to existence. Because the goodness that I have given you back was not part of your existence. And I was able to take it out of your existence and pay you back here, in this world. So that when I look at your existence, all I see is self-destruct, and out of the existence you go. It's very important to understand these two principles. That basically, when a person does a chait, a mitzvah or a chait, a positive deed, or he does a transgression, fundamentally they say what will happen to him in terms of eternity. They are statements about his existence, you see. But what the Rebbeinu does, in certain cases, the Rebbeinu takes the consequences and externalizes them so that they are not statements about the person's existence. They are outside entities that in some way can be dealt with independently of the subject. And yet not affect his eternal existence. Rather, not affect his eternal existence. But he can only do that if the mitzvahs that he did are not part of him, and therefore do not force his continued existence. So the Rebbeinu takes the tov, the goodness, and externalizes it and pays back to Rasha the good things that he's done as an external thing, so that he can easily be erased. And all that he's left with are the evil deeds that he's done. And that's because Olam Haba is a place of purification or split existence. There cannot be combinations of good and bad in Olam Haba. You are either good or you are non-existent. One of the two. There are no combinations in Olam Haba which exist as they do now. Some words of hope. The Rebbeinu externalized evil to save mankind. That's what we see. Things which are very extraordinary about the whole thing itself. That the Rebbeinu externalized evil to save mankind. But in doing so, he had to disfigure existence itself. You see. So that what happened was the disfiguration of existence itself is laid at man's doorstep. What Adam Rishon did by doing his sin was much more, you see, than you even begin to realize. What Adam Rishon did fundamentally is change the laws of spiritual reality itself. He forced Kaviyachol means anthropomorphically, not literally, but figuratively. He forced God, meaning that the Rebbeinu did it on his own because the Rebbeinu knew that this was the best way to go, to disfigure existence itself, to allow him to survive. And by doing that, he brought enormous suffering into the world. The suffering that we see in the world today, the suffering of the Jews for the last thousands of years, the exile, and the destruction, and the Holocaust, which is probably the highest level of that, is nothing more than the activation and the continuous involvement of externalized evil. You see, playing itself out. Now, I will say one thing about that, another interesting piece of information about that. Why did the Rebbeinu do that? Why did he externalize the evil? Because there's a strange thing about it, and I won't go into the details of it. Evil really is a state of existence, meaning it's a neshama that's about to be annihilated. When the Rebbeinu externalized it and made it into a living, breathing entity outside of him, it has its own laws now. But the truth of the matter is, if you really think about it, we see that evil is what? A state of existence. But that state of existence is non-existence. It means, as the neshama is about to go down into non-existence, that's what evil is. Now, if the Rebbeinu externalized that, the Rebbeinu therefore gave existence to non-existence. That's what externalization means. But wait, how can you give existence to non-existence? That's an incredible thing. That is the intervention of the Rebbeinu in the laws of existence. That's an impossibility. You can't make something which does not exist suddenly exist. But the Rebbeinu had to do that. Because it's either the neshama falls back to the non-existence, or the Baruch Shem has to separate that non-existential power and take it out of the person, so that the person can live. But when the person lives, non-existence suddenly becomes alive. Now by the laws of non-existence itself, it cannot remain alive. It must go back to non-existence. And that is the ultimate Yeshua of all mankind. In other words, by giving existence to non-existence, by doing that and allowing man to survive, by taking the evil from him and making it into a Frankenstein, that Frankenstein, by virtue of its own nature, cannot live long. Why? Because a Frankenstein is a completely disordered person. You see, it's like a person with the heart, lungs, and all the systems in exact reverse order, so that it's impossible for it to exist. It lives by the grace of the Baruch Shem, by the will of God. It is an empty being that lives by His will. That's all. It is forced into existence because the Baruch Shem so ordains it. You see. But because of the fact that it is compelled to be where it should not, it eventually annihilates itself. And it's the annihilation of that evil itself, of that true form, that evil, which is the dharma, which is the externalization, is the evil which causes the tremendous suffering of all the Jews and of all mankind for all time. It is that evil that does it. But that evil was created to be destroyed by its own nature. And there will come a time when that evil will suddenly self-destruct and it will leave the human race intact. You see. That's essentially what the entire thing is about. When will that come about? When that is about to materialize. When the evil has reached its last point. Its last point. So that it is 1 second away from its own self-destruction. What then happens? The Mashiach appears. Because the Mashiach appears at the instant, or rather, right before it's annihilated, and finishes off the rest of the job. It is the essential purpose of the Mashiach to annihilate this externalized evil. And by annihilating it, man becomes totally pure and ready for a whole different stage. You see. But how that works, and the entire laws that operate, and why it annihilates itself, is obviously extraordinarily deep, so that the greatest of the prophets and the greatest of the sages were not privy to that information. It was held back from them. And the key to that lies in the externalization of evil, lies in the creation of its existence from non-existence, you see. So that eventually it could be dissolved by its own activity. But until it lives, it's a Frankenstein on your back, you see, beating you constantly. Every time you do a chait, he grows in power, and he gets heavier and heavier, so that by the time he's finished, if you have done many, many bad things, he is an enormous monster riding on top of your back. And that power gives him the power to oppress you, and to hurt you, and to do tremendous difficult things to you. And it's not physically. He has the power to make you sick in whatever form that he wants. He has the power to impoverish you, get you fired, get you to lose your job. He has the power to get you beaten up, killed, whatever the story is. Every manifestation of evil in this world comes from that source. He even has the power, you see, to change the light to red when you're about to cross the street. Now, I say that somewhat facetiously because, as I've said before, if a person comes to a street corner and wants to cross the street and suddenly it turns red, that's tsar, that's pain, isn't it? It's painful. Now, you may say, well, that's part of life. No, it is not part of life. It is the result of your sins. It is the Frankenstein on the back that has switched that light so that you can experience a little bit of that pain. It's not much, you see. It's a slight tap on the head. That's all it is. But even to that extent, all that comes from this Frankenstein that we've created that lives on our back, but better on our back than in our person. Better alive under such a heavy weight than dead with no weight at all. Tshuva will eliminate that Frankenstein. Yes. Tshuva is the one thing. It is the one thing that will eliminate that Frankenstein. The other thing is that when that Frankenstein harms you and hurts you, he will eliminate himself. You see, the more he causes you pain, the weaker he becomes. But the only way to get rid of that Frankenstein, or that Dharma, as we say, which is the result of your deeds, your transgression, without suffering as a result, is from Tshuva. Tshuva, therefore, is an enormous weapon, you see, because it can steer you into tremendous sorrow and suffering. It can steer you an enormous amount. In order to accomplish the externalization to some degree, the Rebbeinu Shalom had to change the nature of the Yetzer Hara. This is a very strange thing. When God first created the Satan, who is a malach, designed, given the job of seducing a person and accusing him and annihilating him, all that is from Mishpat. When God created this malach is like every other malach. Like every other malach. More powerful than all the other malachim. And the Rebbeinu Shalom said to him, I give you a job, a very holy job. And that job is to give man the opportunity of free will. You see. Now that malach was a very great malach. The greatest. And he was a very holy malach. And that malach looked at the Rebbeinu Shalom and said, by all means. Because that's what his job. He had no other choice. Malachim do what the Rebbeinu Shalom says. He then went down to Adam Rishon, and he threw the Nachash, seduced them, through Chava and Adam. As soon as that happened, the Rebbeinu Shalom turned around, and he disfigured the Satan himself. In other words, the most important consequence of the Chet of Adam Rishon was the fact that the Satan himself was altered. Totally altered. So that when the Satan turned around and looked at God, it could not recognize him anymore. And in that role, the Satan then becomes the externalized form. So that in order to create this externalization, everything was changed, including the Satan himself. So that the Yetzer Hara that you have is not the same as Adam Rishon had before he sinned. It is a totally different kind of thing. But the ramifications of that is extraordinary, you see. Because one of the things that man did was that he caused the destruction or the disfiguration of the Satan himself. So he has to give a refuah. He has to cure not only himself, but he must cure the Satan. And the one who will do that again is the Mashiach. The Mashiach stands ready to cure the Satan himself. That is the Nachash. That's a very hidden thing, how that goes. But that's really what it is. But we're going further on. We need a lot more information about this externalization process. But suffice to say at this point is that in order for God to save the world, he had to change the concept of an evil deed. He had to change the consequence of an evil deed so that it does not reflect on the existence of man and annihilate him. What it does, it simply will oppress him and inflict troubles on him, but it will not annihilate him. In order to do that, the Rebbeinu Shalom changes from an existential consequence to the creation of an actual entity called evil, which comes back to haunt them. This thing that the Rebbeinu Shalom did is, as far as I know, the most significant thing that has ever been done. It is the thing which ultimately we will all understand to a T. And that, when we do understand, we will see the power of God in its highest form. Because when we understand how God interferes with the laws of existence itself, that God loved Klal Yisrael, the Jews, to such an extent that he literally undermined the laws of reality in order to save them. And we will understand the absolute control of God over the laws of reality. And that God can take that which appears to be non-existent, an annihilation, and convert it to a form where it can literally give you existence. Can only be true of a being who is so absolute, who transcends existence and reality to such an extent that there is nothing beyond his ability and nothing beyond his power. And what I'm showing you here today is an infinitesimal sequence of events that he did in doing that. And how incredible his power, how hidden his power is. You see. Like it says in the Pasuk, Ato Keil Mistater, you are a hidden God, Elekei Yisrael Mashiach, who redeems Israel. God redeems Israel by his hidden quality. You see. God redeems Israel not by the dispensation of justice. You see. The true power of God lies in the dispensation of Rachamim, in the way he saves the world, not in the way he judges it. The strength of God, you see, definitely lies in his justice, you see. But the awesome power of God lies in his mercy, because the mercy is not simply, oh, I feel sorry for you today, with a pat on the back. That's not the mercy of God. The mercy of God is the alteration of existence. So you do not use the laws of existence to annihilate yourself. That is the ultimate Rahmanis of the Gonachal, and the ultimate power of Rahman. He said to man, I will make you the highest kind of being that I will have created. In creating man, God created a being who in a certain sense, Kaviochel, is free of him. You have to understand the level of that kind of creation. The Rebbeinu made man to be in a certain way like God. Once the Rebbeinu made man into such an exalted state, you see, again, the essence of the matter lies in what the Rebbeinu wants to make man. God decided to create a being who literally is totally free of reality, like him, in a sense. He created a neshama, listen carefully. He created a neshama, which was given the ability to choose freely beyond existence, and in so doing would act like God, and in so doing would reflect a power of God in its own way. This is the most exalted thing that has ever been created, you see. But in order to do this, or rather in doing this, when God created this kind of being, he gave it the ability to create and destroy. That's part of being a semi-God, you see. Once you make something, once you give something such an exalted status of being able to do something which transcends existence, you give it the power, Kaviochel, of a God in a sense. You see what I'm saying? Once you give it the power, then you give it the ability to determine aspects of existence and non-existence by virtue of what you've created. You see. That's Mishpat. God wants to do that because he wanted to create a being who is so exalted, who can create Olam Haba on itself, on its own, you see, and create its own existence. But, at the same time, he also gave the Neshama the ability to annihilate itself, because it has the ability to create itself too. It has the ability to create its own continued existence, so therefore it has the ability to discontinue its own existence. That's part of its exalted status. You see, once that was done, then the Rebbeinu simply would sit back and watch and see what this being would do, who is totally free on its own. Sitting back, the Rebbeinu knew and saw that this being would destroy itself. So the Rebbeinu said, I must now interfere with its divine-like quality. I gave it divine-like qualities so that it can do that which has never been done before and by no one else. But I see it will misuse and abuse that divine-like quality. So what I must do, I want to redeem that. I don't want it to destroy itself. So what the Bonisham then did was to come from a different side, a different transcendent point of existence, and allow the neshama to act kaviyachol like a god, but also prevent it from acting like a god, both at the same time. How do you do that? How? So what the Bonisham did was, in his own way, he transcended all existence into himself. That's why it's called Ananda Yichud. What the Bonisham did was simply withdraw into his own being in its absolute way and design the situation so that the neshama can create an olam haba, but not destroy it. But that's not a loophole. We're not dealing with loopholes, because what you have to understand is we are not dealing with cause and effect. You don't understand what it means, free will. Free will is beyond cause and effect. Do you know anything in the reality which is beyond cause and effect? No. There's nothing that you know that's beyond cause and effect. Everything has a cause, has an identifiable cause. And from every cause, there must come a specific prescribed effect. That's the law of reality. It's the law of existence. There is one thing and one thing only which transcends the law of cause and effect, which transcends the essence of law itself. Natural law, supernatural law, call it what you will. And that is free will. The free will of the neshama transcends all cause and effect, and therefore is beyond the existence that we know. Once something has that ability, you see, its power is awesome, and it has the power to destroy. What the Bonisham did was to prevent the misuse of that power. But in order to do that, he had to also go into the world which is beyond cause and effect. So that everything you see taking place happens in a world which is unknowable. The free will of man is unknowable, its origin is unknowable. The intervention into that free will is unknowable and unfathomable. Because everything is beyond cause and effect, and the mind can only understand that which submits to structure, which submits to organization, which submits to cause and effect. Anything beyond that is beyond your head. Everything you see working here are not loopholes. Because the loopholes are essentially ways or different exits to certain prescribed structural outcomes. There is no structural outcome here. Because there is no structure. We are dealing with laws. Rather, we are dealing with aspects that are beyond law cause and effect, and beyond law itself. So therefore, their ultimate origins are unfathomable. We can never understand them, you see. But what we do understand is, when it finally appears to us, is what the Bonisham did was, he prevented what should have been one aspect of reality, or one consequence, and substituted for another. That substitution has nothing to do with reality. That substitution was an intervention on reality. Because the laws of existence say that what God did is impossible. That's what the laws of existence says, is that if you are a God, you have the ability to create. And if you have the ability to create, you have the ability to destroy. That's what the law of existence says. You see, to prevent that outcome is to go beyond existence. You see. And that's what the Bonisham did. This is no loophole we're talking about. This is an exception to all reality itself. Do I make myself clear? Yeah, but you still have time. Yeah. In losing, in externalizing the evil of your deeds, anyone's deeds, when a person does evil deeds, he does those deeds by virtue of free will, you see. But once the consequences of those deeds are externalized, then what happens is that it's taken out of him and put on top of him, as a Frankenstein, as I've used the metaphor. Once that Frankenstein sits on your back, you've lost a certain amount of free will. Because that Frankenstein has the right and the power to do with you what he wants to do. And you cannot do anything about it. Unless you do tshuva. But other than tshuva, which still remains in the realm of free will, you cannot dislodge that person. He can only dislodge himself by his own self-destructive process. And that's what it is. Tshuva got a hot group tonight. Tshuva is an absolute miracle. Because tshuva is also an exception to the laws of existence. It is. Once you've done a sin, you've done it. And that's it. You've created a consequence. So how do you get rid of it? Tshuva is a net. It is a miracle. Meaning, it is beyond the laws of reality itself. But the specific mechanism of tshuva is a very, very complicated situation, which I don't want to go into now. Let's go into the entire process of din itself. Yes.
Would you say that the loss of Bechira is an aspect of non-existence that is the consequence of Chet, that you have destroyed that aspect of your existence?
Yes, yes, definitely. Definitely. Very good point. Very good. In a certain sense, what is being said over here, which is very true, is that even though you are preserved and spared by the evil consequence not being a statement of your existence and it's externalized, but as we have said, once it's externalized, you've lost a certain amount of free will. That loss of free will is to some degree an aspect of annihilation. It is. But it is not the annihilation of self. It is simply the annihilation of the power of the self to exercise certain specific prerogatives. And one of them is free will. But that is the 2 points. There is an aspect of annihilation. But I tell you what, let's stop here, and we have enough to go on next week too. And the week after. Hey, I'm not going anywhere, okay?